Thank you for watching this video. We would like to thank our 2024 gold level sponsors, Geronimo Properties, May Property Management, Northmark, Boston Planning and Development Agency, and Cabot and Company. We would also like to recognize our 2024 charitable partner, Ironstone Farm. The views expressed on this program are solely those of the participants and do not reflect the views of the CCIM Institute, the New England CCIM Chapter, or any other organizations. Greetings and welcome to episode 5 of the New England CCIM Chapter Podcast. I'm Michael Chase, former chapter president for 2022, current board member and treasurer. I'm also a commercial mortgage banker with Northmark. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Mayrand.
Thank you, Michael. Again, Matt Mayrand from Glickman, Cavago, and Jacobs and May Property Management. How you doing today, Mike?
Not too bad. It's spring is in the air.
Yes, it's a little rainy, but love spring.
So, as always, before we jump into today's topics, we'd like to mention a few items. Later this month, the chapter is hosting our Pickleball Open on Thursday evening, May 23rd at Pickle Boston from 5:30 to 8 p.m. Please check out the New England CCIM Chapter's website. Follow the chapter on LinkedIn to keep up to date on all the events. Let's jump into today's topic. We wanted to talk about leasing today and start off by talking about kind of the lease versus own scenario. So, Matt, you mentioned that in general, you're more of a proponent for owning, but given the current market dynamics, leasing might be a play.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And you're right. I'm definitely a long-term proponent in owning. I love real estate. That's kind of why I'm involved in it, in that capital appreciation and also paying down that debt service over time. It's kind of hard to separate that entirely from the analysis. But if you're a business owner and you're looking to what your expenses are going to be on an annual basis and are not totally focused on wealth accumulation or some of these other metrics, then it certainly could be more advantageous to lease versus own. And to give a pretty good narrative on some examples, many of those triple net retailers, lease their facility. They'll lease it for, whatever lifetime it is, 30 years, 25 years, 35 years. And then at the end of it, they wipe their hands of it. They give it back to the owner and they move on and build another new one and run their business that way. So I think there is definitely a case for that in smart business. And as an investor, I'm always, looking around trying to find any kind of opportunity. And when I run the numbers on a lot of this stuff, again, from a buyer's perspective, based on the rents that they're getting, I would rather be the tenant than the guy buying the building, right? My point being, sometimes there's a little bit of a mismatch with macroeconomic trends in buying right now. Construction costs are super high. Interest rates are higher than they have been, haven't really reset in this area yet. Because of that, I think it's a time to carefully look at your options as a business owner and potentially lease.
So you're a business owner. How do you begin the analysis? What are some of the things that you look at or some of the key metrics that you focus on initially if you're making a lease versus own decision?
Well, it's a funny tie-in. I'm pretty sure that's very much what CCIM teaches you is you could do a discounted cash flow based on those two items, pre-tax discounted cash flow, and just look at what your expenses are and then look at what your all-in cost of those two properties are. And, as a business owner, it's your decision to make the best choice for your business at that time. One way to look at leasing is that if you can invest money in your business and make a better return, then you should invest money in your business, not in real estate. And in certain times, that equation is tighter, and certain times that's a broader gap where the idea of leasing is maybe more desirable for owner users.
So as I'm hearing you, I'm thinking the owner option, I'm going to be looking at a large capital outlay upfront. And then if I have to finance that, as you mentioned, you got high interest rate environment, and then you got the cost of that capital that you needed to use to acquire the property. And that's kind of your ownership cost. But then as a tenant, you might not have the significant upfront outlay, but then you're spreading your cost over time through the lease. Is that kind of the gist between own versus lease, that time value of money?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a demand for things to purchase. And because of that, there's slightly less demand, or in some instances, a lot less demand for things to lease. And so there's a mismatch there. So you're going to get discounts if you're a tenant, and you're going to get premiums if you're a buyer. So there's kind of a bit of a mismatch there. I'll tell you from experience, landlords will fight for a good tenant.
So are you seeing some business owners who currently own a property, their current loan is coming up for maturity and refinance, and they're looking at the new cost of capital, and maybe now they're looking at, gee, do I do a sale leaseback? Do I convert from being an owner to being a tenant? Are you seeing more of that?
Yeah, we're seeing the beginnings of some of that. Again, it's very, our market is different than, again, Central Mass is different than Boston. Boston's different than New York. So, all of this trails quite a bit. Historically, Worcester, Central Massachusetts is like 18 months behind some of these other, major primary markets. So we're maybe in a different spot than, some of these other areas were. And I expect there to be greater opportunities like that coming down the pipe, but not a ton as of yet.
Okay.
A lot of times, too, is there's just so little inventory of owner user opportunities out there that we're kind of in a bit of a lockup period, because there's nowhere for that person to move, right? So if they want to do a sale leaseback, that would be great, but they have to really know that they're not going to need any changes to that facility. They need to be hyper content that they're not going to see any, growth or contraction or any changes to their business. And if that's the case, then yeah, I think it could be a great opportunity. But a lot of businesses, need a little bit of wiggle room, and especially where there's so many market unknowns, that can be a little bit more challenging.
Let's put your tenant rep hat on for a moment. And
Sure.
what are some of the other things that a tenant should be looking at in order to make sure that they are signing, at least in the most favor for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things at a high level to think about as a tenant. I have most experience with office space, so I'll kind of relate it to office tenants. But one of the bigger trends that we've seen is moving from less efficient space to more efficient space. If you're in an older building, the floor plates don't lay out particularly well. There's a lot of lost space. If it's multi generations old, it could be like an old law firm where there's giant, tall, beautiful doors and lots of small offices that no one really wants to live in anymore, right? So those kind of spaces are different than the space that we see more and more, where businesses are moving to a more flexible layout, more of an open layout. A lot more soft seating areas, a lot of high tops and soft chairs, and little breakout areas for people. And one of the things that we've seen a lot over the past, several years with the recruiting market so tight is, younger folks really do, they operate differently than I would have in my generation, the old fogies.
Sure.
But they like that collaborative environment. They work great in a collaborative environment. So you really do need to provide a lot of light, a lot of good, good working environments where they can kind of come together and work well, which will definitely help companies in recruiting, and finding good talent is what it's all about.
So how does a tenant incorporate that into their lease?
So first is, identifying exactly how much space you need, no more, no less.
Okay.
So that's a big component. So if you go from inefficient to efficient, maybe you can cut 30% of the space that you need.
Okay.
Right. So if you're paying, 20, $30 a foot, and now you're not paying on 20, 30% of that, that's a huge savings, right? So,
Right.
that's one part of it. The other part of it is doing, I like to try to maximize multiple uses, like, for example, big meeting rooms or even smaller meeting rooms. Like, let's not have an overabundance of these. Try to use it for multiple functions if you can, because you hate to have gigantic rooms that people are in once a month, things like that. But then, going back to the previous example, make sure you know what you're paying for, right? What's included? Is it fully gross? Is it, are your utilities separately metered? Are you paying for cleaning inside your suite? Are you not? What are the all-in expenses, including everything you need, cable, internet, everything, phones? What is the build out? Build outs are super expensive. We're seeing more and more tenants are having to put money into the build out.
Mm.
The amount that landlords finance the build out and amortize it that finance rate has gone up a lot as well. So understanding kind of all of that is really, really critical.
As someone who has worked as a tenant rep, particularly you mentioned a focus previously in office space, given the challenges in the office market and some of those challenges that landlords are facing, do you find tenants are asking landlords for their financials to confirm how the office building is doing, to confirm that the landlord isn't under financial stress?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised, if we see more and more of that kind of thing because the word is certainly out. People are coming to me, with different projects where, office related listings, and they're looking for deep discounts. So people are aware of the stress in office and are looking to take advantage of that. But we haven't gotten to the point yet where, tenants are maybe double checking on landlords. That being said, we deal with a number of smaller tenants in this market, but if you're dealing with, a marquee major national tenant, it wouldn't surprise me.
Sure. All right. So now let's flip the script and put on the landlord hat. You're needing to fill space in your property. What can you do to maximize your leasing as a landlord?
Yeah, it's not the first time I've seen this cycle. It's happened a few times. Obviously, it's a little different each time, so you never know for sure. But last go around, what was really important was duration, right? So, landlords wanted to blend and extend, we were calling it, So if a tenant is in based on, maybe they're 2, 3 years old, 4 years old, they're probably at a pretty pre-COVID high office rent. Well, they know that prices are much lower now. They're not going to renew at that rent. So you might as well just go ahead and realize what the market is, kind of market to market, but lock in some duration, right? So if
Okay.
you can, take somebody that, maybe has 2, 3 years left on their lease, extend it out 10 years, maybe take a little bit of hit, offer some free rent up front, things like that, that doesn't have a dramatic effect on your property's, cash flow or your income. That duration will probably ride you through a big chunk of the problem. So that would probably be what I would do as kind of a step one if I own properties, is just find all my good tenants, lock them in for as long as I can, even if I have to offer some incentives. The incentives that I would offer would be ones that bleed off relatively quick. So, assuming you can afford it, free rent is a great tool because, you give them 3, 4, 5, 6 months. I did a deal not that long ago where I think it had a total of 14 months of free rent up front because, they
Wow.
were moving. Yeah. So, helping to offset some of the moving costs, helping to offset this or that. At some point, that free rent period will burn off. So as long as you can get through it on a cash flow perspective, after the end of that period, you're not discounting your rental rate. So from a financing perspective, right, you want to make sure to keep that rental rate as high as you can because that's going to affect the overall valuation in your building. So if you could have a higher rate but give away some free rent up front, that will help so you're not, lowering the relative value of your building over a long period of time. And that I guess would be the other warning is if you're a landlord and you're feeling the pinch, right? You're not in a in a good position and you're a little worried. You don't want to be desperate and lock yourself into a long-term, very low lease because that will be the death nail, right? That will be, something that really hits you hard unless you're going to come out with a lot of cash, and
Right.
hand it over to the bank. So finding that right balance, making good deals, smart deals. Also, if there's any opportunity to push additional expenses off to the tenant, whatever expenses, that are under the lease, obviously you're not going to, push things over that you're not able to. But, just like your cereal boxes get thinner and thinner,
Yep.
shrinkflation, it's kind of like the same idea. As your operating expenses get higher and higher, you can't absorb them. You got to kind of
Yep.
pass them through. or kind of reduce some of the levels of service. And I guess that would be the final part is, just look at all of your expenses,
Mm.
and really work hard to get those to be as thin as possible without compromising service.
So you mentioned duration a little bit. In the current market, who's looking to be shorter? Who's looking to be longer? Is it landlords that are looking to try to do some shorter leases in the hope that rents might rebound and then they can come back in and reset the market? And tenants are looking to take advantage of a low point in the market cycle and try to get longer leases?
No, I think you have that right. My only question is we're at a kind of a spot, like a teetering spot, you know what I mean? And it's very, specific to the building, to the area,
Right.
but I think we're at a point where landlords would like to be longer, assuming
Okay.
that the rents are not too low, right? But if somebody's like looking for um, a deep discount, right? A very, very deep discount, then I think that the landlord wants to be shorter, right? So the blend and extend is not like a deep discount tool. It's trim a little bit, make it a little bit more market palatable,
Mm.
and secure it for a longer duration, but don't hurt yourself in doing that, right?
Right.
But sometimes, yeah, you get a lot of vacant space. You got to do a deal. You got to get cash in the door. Those need to be short because then you get into financing covenants and things like that.
Are there any lease terms right now that you find tenants and landlords kind of butting heads over more often than maybe in the past?
Yeah, I think the one thing that comes to mind is, tenant improvements. So construction costs are way, way up. I mean, I
Mm.
remember a period of time where, again, this is, central Massachusetts, so the numbers are going to be different. But we used to see, tenant improvement allowances, TI, at maybe like $35 a foot. And it would be kind of sufficient. It would not get everything, but it would allow, paint, carpet, decent, moving some walls around, that kind of thing. Now we're in like the $100 a square foot range,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so it's gone up quite a bit. So even if a landlord, and this is, class A landlord, is offering, $65 a foot or $60 a foot, there's still a $35 square foot delta.
Mm.
And so we're hearing more and more tenants are having to come to the table with a check for the improvement. So that's a big difference from where things were, and that's a major, major obstacle for kind of any tenant, right? I mean, if you're going to lease, in my opinion, you should not invest too much capital up front. It kind of takes away some of the benefit of doing a lease versus owning.
Right. Circling
But
back to the beginning of the conversation.
yeah, right. I
Right.
mean, what's the point if you're going to give somebody a gigantic check and all the rent moving forward? Then you're like, I don't love that.
Right.
Um, if you can, but certainly a class A office tenant is less likely to buy a whole tower,
Sure.
to avoid paying rent. But still, it hurts anyone, I'm sure, to write that check.
If the landlord's gonna have to write a big check, then they're gonna want a longer lease. The tenant wants a shorter lease, then you're not gonna get as much fit out.
Yeah, the other thing too is, so banks in the past, were pretty good. If you had a nice tenant, they would loan you some money to do the TI as a landlord.
Mm.
Now it's a lot harder. Banks are not eager to jump onto, signing up all this extra equity, that's not necessarily, secured by anything more than, the property as a whole, which
Right.
probably already has its own debt on it, So they're really trying to finance, the credit of the lease. But it's not great for banks these days. I don't think they love doing that. They feel it's a little too risky. And so I'm sure they're going to apply a higher interest rate. And so once again, the money to borrow from the landlord's perspective to do the TI, to give that $65 or whatever, is
Mm.
extremely it's more limited to begin with. That they're only going to have so much that the bank will give them, and then it's quite a
Right.
bit more expensive. So that's going to add to the overall cost of the lease, just the amortized additional expense. And if a tenant does need to break a lease or whatever, that's going to be a big component of it, right? Like, how does that all get paid back? And
Hmm.
let's assume that there's a tenant that is willing to take over that space. There's still, a negotiation that needs to be had over that unamortized TI, and that type of thing. So it does make everything more difficult, all the way around, if things go bad, because just all of these expenses are very real. They're in the deal. They're often the biggest the biggest component of the lease. When we're out doing, negotiating and all, for deals that are, relatively new build out without existing, build out in place. That's definitely the number one thing we look at for overall cost.
Yep.
Certainly the operating expenses are important. The base rent is very important, but that TI piece, which can vary widely from building to building, based on whatever the plan is. And that's why that efficiency that I was, talking about earlier, because it's not only the rent of the shell, but then it's all the TI that goes into it. It's all the, custom stuff that you need to operate the business. The tenant only cares about, well, what's my all-in number? How much is it going to cost me to operate at this building, right?
Yeah.
They don't care so much about this per square foot or that. And that's an important thing for any tenant to know, is like, what's your all-in cost, and
Good.
compare the all-in cost building to building. That's the important metric.
Sounds like they need to hire a professional to help them with comparing building to building.
I think so too, but I'm a little biased, but I do think that there's a lot that goes into it. Unless you're doing it day in and day out, it doesn't hurt, and I've worked with a lot of really, really smart, experienced people over the years, but they're busy, right? They're running businesses. They're not, they don't have the bandwidth necessarily to do all this stuff and to rally the troops internally and get all the feedback and stuff. So a lot of the work that I do as a tenant rep is really kind of helping everybody understand, what is their space needs, what are the different stakeholders, what do they really need moving forward as far as room counts and head counts and all that kind of stuff. So that space planning exercise is really important. And then, at the end of it, after we have a kind of a short list, having a real thorough analysis of what that all-in cost is, building to building, with variable expenses and all of that. And the one thing I can share that I find interesting, that often, if you're looking at just the rack rate, the X per square foot for this space versus that space, and then you do a whole analysis, sometimes a different a different property pops up as the more cost effective one, and not necessarily the one that you think of right out of the gates, because all those other variable expenses do make quite a bit of difference. And I use a tool called ProCalc, and it helps you kind of get all the variable expenses in there, and discounts it to present value, and kind of does all that sort of stuff. So it's really helpful in making sure you make the right long-term choice as a tenant.
Right. That was a lot to digest. There's a lot of information shared there. Do you have any parting thoughts?
I do. Again, I've been through a couple of different cycles, and everybody is saying office is dead and this and that. I don't buy it. I think there's challenges. I know there's challenges, but I do believe things will come back. I think things come back and they'll be different. I think there's smart ways to do it. I am a believer in people coming together as a group. So I'm kind of pro getting out of the house and your comfy slippers and, getting into some collaborative environment, maybe not full time, but certainly a part of the week. And so I do see, some of that coming back. I think it swings one way or another, and we're kind of already seeing it a little bit. So
yeah, absolutely. Great. Matt, thank you again for that great overview of lease versus own, what you can do as a tenant to maximize your lease, and then what you need to do as a landlord. Thank you for joining us on today's podcast. Please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and other social media platforms. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe below. Hit that notification button so you can be informed whenever we post another episode. Thank you for joining us.
thank you.